autumn breeze. Dead leaves beneath my feet. A long walk home. A long walk home. On broken knees. Prepared for defeat. One chance to escape. A single chance of escape.
All right. There we go. Everything looks good. Well, mostly. OBS is sometimes a little strange. But, you know, it's free software, so what are you going to do? I suppose you could do something else, but it works. So, for those who have been following along, this is the final week that I'm dealing with what we term as Maymester, which is a sort of compressed semester instead of 15 weeks, or 16 weeks rather, depending upon how you calculate it, if you include finals week, right? So instead of 15 weeks, we have the same content, but presented over 14 days, over 3 weeks. And this is the last week. We got 4 days to go. Today we're doing Audition, and tomorrow Premiere Pro, and then Adobe After Effects, and then on Friday we're going to do Adobe Animate, which of course, you know, is one of my favorite applications in Creative Cloud. So I figured today we would do a little kind of like intro to some concepts in Adobe Animate for those who are just getting started with Animate or don't know anything about Animate. You know, we can look at that today. And again, these during Maymester, these streams are intentionally very quick. I do hope to reschedule past a different time after Maymester is done. And the problem is so, you know, I do stream on behalf of Adobe for Education, and, you know, they're just trying to figure things out right now in terms of kind of who's responsible for this sort of stuff. So there's no real way for me to reschedule these right now. So hopefully by next week that will resolve itself. Until then, I'm just hanging. So we'll see what happens. Anyhow, Adobe Animate, right? So here we are inside of Animate. And also for those who have not attended these streams before, please go ahead and say hello in the chat. So it's not so one-sided, right? Okay, Adobe Animate. So what we're gonna do, and I gave this stream the title Intro to Frame Types in Adobe Animate. So that's kind of what we're gonna focus on here as a kind of getting started in Animate. Probably the easiest way to get started is just to create, you know, from a preset here. So I'm gonna choose more presets inside of Animate's home screen. And the new document dialog opens up. From here, we can choose, right, from a number of different categories, all sorts of different presets, just like Photoshop, just like Illustrator, InDesign, and the rest. And let's just choose standard 640 by 480. We could also do a 1280 by 720 HD, but this is fine for what we're doing today. We're just doing demo stuff. So let's go ahead and hit create. Cool. Let me see here. Close out that. Yeah, so when you get into Animate, there's a couple of things to note. So we're going to focus on frames, right? This little slider down below here is going to allow you to expand or contract your timeline so that you can see individual frames better, or if you can see like the full extent of the timeline better, whatever you need to do, right? And since Animate is a frames-based timeline natively, so of course there is, the concept of time. If you're coming to Animate from something like After Effects, Premiere Pro, Audition, right? Those are time focused. They're very time oriented. With Animate, it all starts with frames, and that gets translated into time. So you can see here we've got 1 frame right now inside of our timeline. 30 frames per second is our frame rate. So what that means, of course, is that when we go up to frame 30 right here, which doesn't exist yet, but if we were to go up here, that would be 1 second of motion, right? So what's the difference between different frame types inside of Animate? And I kind of saw this as an Adobe community expert. I look at the forums and see what kind of questions people are asking all the time, right? In the Animate forums and other forums. And, the other day, I think it was yesterday or the day before, something like that, somebody was like, how do I get these kind of frames inside of Animate? And that's what sort of gave me the idea to like focus on frames for this session today. So when you first create an Animate document, you get a single frame. You can see it right here. And this particular frame type is what's known as an empty keyframe or a blank keyframe. And we can see here that there is a little unfilled circle. So keyframes look a bit different inside of Animate than they do in other Adobe Creative Cloud applications. Although sometimes they can appear as little diamonds, just as you would expect from, coming from After Effects or Premiere Pro or something like that. Generally, they're going to be circular in nature, in form. So you can see a circular keyframe right here, and it's an empty keyframe. The reason it's empty is because we have nothing on the stage quite yet. So if I use any of my drawing tools here, like let's create a little oval, and let's make it like let's make it a green, fully opaque green circle with no stroke, right? So I go ahead and I draw that out. As soon as that has been drawn out, you'll notice since we now have something actually on the stage, we have content that is tied to this particular formerly blank keyframe, and now it is a filled circle. So a filled circle, whether it's black or white, is going to say like, hey, there is content in here. So this is a keyframe, right? So this is a keyframe. If I go over in my timeline and I'm like, hey, I want to extend my frame span to 1 second. Because right now I can hit play and you can see nothing happens because we only have a single frame. And with 1 frame, it's basically a still image, right? There's no actual animation to occur. So what we're going to do is extend this to 1 second. That's 30 frames in this particular case. You can always change the FPS setting right here within your document properties. But I am going to go ahead and extend this, insert frame, boom. And now if I play it back, right, the timeline is present. The blue playhead marker actually moves across the timeline, because it's not just stuck at a single frame. So additionally, these additional frames that I inserted, right, they do not have any circle attributed to them whatsoever. So that is going to signify that these are just common frames. They're not keyframes, they're not blank keyframes, they're just frames. And all of them together make up what's known as a frame span, a span of frames. So we have a single keyframe at frame 1, and then we have frames up until frame 30, and all of this together create a frame span. So what if we were to go in here like frame 25 and insert a blank keyframe? There we go. So we inserted a blank keyframe. You can see that that keyframe is now a blank keyframe. It's an empty, unfilled circle. But in addition to that, we actually get, in the frames that follow, you know, there's no content in those frames either, whereas over here, there is content. We hit that blank keyframe, no content. So additionally, there is other stuff you can do. So if I click on this frame right here, and I insert an additional keyframe, so I have 2 keyframes, this keyframe is also black. Now, I mentioned before that you can have white keyframes. So the way that white keyframes occur is a function of advanced layers, which is on by default in any new document you create. And what that means is that you can go over here inside of your content. So I can go down to my filters here, right? I see no filters added right now. Let's kind of squish these up. And if I add a filter, I can add something like a drop shadow. Let's blow this guy up a little more. Give him a little more distance. And take the strength down a little bit. So now I have a drop shadow as part of this. And you'll notice these different effects, when applied in this way, are actually applied to the keyframes themselves and the layers. So here on this frame span that begins with this black filled keyframe, we don't have any effects. We don't have that drop shadow. However, once we hit this little white one, then there we go. There we get the drop shadow applied. That's because, like a lot of things inside of Animate, you know, different properties change based on keyframe. They're actually applied to a specific keyframe. They can be applied to object too, depending upon the object. So objects can have properties, but keyframes and frames can also have properties. The big difference being that any frames in a frame span, those following a keyframe, they will simply just replicate whatever is in the keyframe before them, right? So another thing that can happen sometimes, right? Maybe let's go ahead and this is frame 5. Let's insert another keyframe right there. So with any keyframe, you can actually put in a little label. So it's kind of like a marker. So I could say like 5 seconds, right? And then there we go. We get our little marker and it tells us 5 seconds right there. And you can also go in here. We're already at tall, actually. I was gonna switch this to tall, but we're already there. So yeah, there are options here to view keyframes in different ways. You got like medium, short. We have tall. You can switch the timeline controls to the bottom if you wish. I keep mine up top. And you can choose to preview, right? So preview is going to show you, instead of the keyframes, every keyframe is going to be representative of the particular frame. And you can see even inside of here, right? You get the indication that there is a drop shadow applied to this. However, I usually go through and just use standard view for these things because, especially if you're just learning something like Animate, right? you're going to want to be able to follow along with tutorials. And generally, any tutorials that are created are going to be using the standard view when it comes to your keyframes and your timeline. So it's probably a good idea to keep it at standard. So let's see, what else around keyframes? I mentioned this was going to be short, and it is. Oh, so in addition to this, right, you're probably thinking like, okay, that's cool. But what about animation? We're not like animating anything right now, right? So there's a couple different ways to achieve animation, of course. One way is to do what's known as frame by frame animation, in which you insert keyframes and then shift them a little bit. So if I insert a keyframe, shift that a little bit, insert a keyframe, shift that a little bit. So then right there, we get frame by frame animation. So we get motion right there just by changing the location of the object, right? And we could change all sorts of stuff. If you were using like a stylus to just draw your content, right? You could do frame by frame animation and just be able to easily, tediously create your animation, right? Let's go ahead and shift this keyframe over here. So this one here, this is going to be a different example. So this is frame by frame. I'm going to add another keyframe way over here and then just kind of shift this guy over, right? So right now we've got a jump between these two frame spans. And what I can do is use what's known as a tween. And it's known as a tween because it occurs between two keyframes. So I got a keyframe at frame 6 and I got one at, let's say, frame 10. Let's move it to frame 10. Makes sense. And yeah, now if I select anywhere inside of there and I right click, I can create a shape tween since we're dealing with shapes. And it inserts a little tween right there. And as I move it back and forth, you can see that Animate has gone through because of this tween assignment, and it has, right? It's done its own thing. We don't have to do the frame by frame thing in this case. It's automatically tweening between these properties. Now this is something you would expect to happen automatically if you're coming from something like After Effects, right? After Effects, you set a keyframe here, set a keyframe here. It's going to automatically tween for you because After Effects works differently from Animate, right? Animate, you have to be much more intentional in terms of exactly what you want from the software. So you have to insert specific tween types. You have to make the adjustments that you want and tell Animate how to behave. It is much more sort of like, driven by your intention than it is assuming what you intend to do. And of course, we have our stage color and our document properties, which we can switch to anything we like. I don't know, maybe that's pretty good. And of course, that doesn't apply to any frames. It's a document, so it just shows up across your frame span. And this is basically it, right? We've got our frame by frame animation here with keyframes. We have our tween with keyframes. We've got frame spans. We also have frame spans with effects applied. And in addition, we have empty keyframes or blank keyframes and the accompanying frame span. So yeah, and I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So, I don't know how many people are actually here. Not too many. So we've been going for about 20 minutes. And that's probably good. I have to teach in a little bit. I got to teach some Audition today, which I love teaching Audition. I think it's a very fun piece of software, and it's also very useful, right? So it's really the only piece of software inside of Creative Cloud that lets you do stuff with audio to a very fine, detailed level. Of course, you can do stuff with audio in Animate too, but you can't really edit it in Animate. You can just sort of like change its properties and things like that. You would rely on something like Audition to be able to really refine what you're dealing with. All right, cool. well, that's it. That's what I got for today. So, thank you, everyone. I know this was quick, but it has to be. And I'll see you all later. Goodbye.